Welcome to the Devil's Rest Book Club, where we dive into the details of the Sun Eater universe. It is I, your loyal lieutenant pilot, Cameron, and with me, as always, drawing me in his journal is...
Drew. And this week, we'll be doing 4 chapters today because we thought it was more appropriate given the timing of the story. We will likely be back to 3 chapters an episode in the future, but just depends on what's going on in the story. So 4 chapters today instead of 3.
So where did we leave Hadrian the last time that we had talked?
Yeah, so last time we talked about Hadrian, we had him leaving Colosso and getting super jumped and beat up by some ruffians. This caused him to be quite injured as a result. We have some interesting chapters and dialogue between him and Gibson as he's recovering, his parents notably absent. And our episode ended with Hadrian having a confrontation with his father where they're arguing about his father's sort of lack of caring and also his father's sort of newfound use for Hadrian, so to speak, trying to send him off regardless of Hadrian's wishes to become part of the Chantry. And that's where we sort of pick up here in this next session of the story.
That's because what every red-blooded Solon Imperial Palatine wants to do is to, at 19 years of age, go join the clergy, right?
Right, exactly.
So Hadrian is really pissed about this based on what we saw.
Yes.
So we pick up there. It's been basically 2 weeks since his conversation with his father, and he indicates to us that as he begins by like brooding along the coast, like just this upon this read through, he is such a freaking teenager, dude. Like, I know he's 19 years old, and Palatines are perfect angel-like beings or whatever, but this kid's brain is still a teenager, right? Like, he feels emotionally like a 15, 16-year-old kid sometimes. So he's moping along the coast. Granted, he has good reason, right? He doesn't want to do this.
Yeah.
He disagrees with the whole concept. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. But he's just coping over the last 2 weeks, journaling, drawing, and getting drunk while he's doing it, while he's reading like the writ that his father is sent off to Vesperad, where he will join Lorica College and be part of the Chantry.
So it's official at this point. It's no longer just like a hypothetical, dad's going to do this. Like, no, this is like, it's actually happened, given what we know about this being sent off. So it's starting to get a little more real.
Yeah, 100%. He is leaving the planet for the first, not only that, right? He is leaving the planet that he has grown up on to do something he does not want to do. So he's feeling the weight of that for sure.
Yep.
And basically it's an admission on his father's side. Like, there is no more succession game for you. You're out of it. It's Crispin's. It's not yours. You've lost.
Yep.
So it's double trouble to the ego. On top of that, he makes this weird comment that I picked up on, specifically talking about the aches and pain from his arm. He's giving us an update on how his healing is going, but and even though the Scholiast doctor, Tor Alma, swears that it's going to grow back fine and it's going to be totally fine, everything went perfectly with the surgery and with the healing, he could swear that they have grown back funny despite the doctor telling him this. We need to, and there's a lot, we've seen this before, we need to keep an eye on this as we go forward. That narrator Hadrian is writing this, right? And we've seen some funkiness already, and we're going to see some of the funkiness play out a little bit later in the chapters we discussed today. But every time that he could swear that something is the way it is, we should put a pin in it and remember it later, because that is something weird is going on here with Hadrian's perception of the world.
Yeah.
But while he's like sulking on this beach, Gibson walks down apparently this impossibly high cliffside set of stairs and joins him.
Yeah, and we... quickly, it's interesting the way that Rocchio like sort of tells us things. One of the things that we're sort of told is that this is really affecting Hadrian, and we know that because he's missed lessons with Gibson, which is very not like this is like sort of the thing that's most important to him. Not only that, he's missed lessons not because he's intentionally doing, he's lost track of time. Like he's not even, he's just so in his head that he just keeps lapsing. He's like, I think Gibson shows up. He's like, "Hey, you missed your lesson." He's like, "No, I haven't." It's not even to end, and he doesn't realize what time has actually happened. Just sitting so long here, just melodrama playing out in his head until the entire day's gone.
That's really interesting because, okay, thinking about that for you and for me, in those times that I'm feeling like, I don't know, melodramatic or, depressed or whatever, time seems to go slower for me. Like, I don't lose track of time that way. Do you? Do you experience time like that?
That's an interesting question. I don't typically lose track of time a ton, but I think there's something to be said for maybe like this sort of artsy kind of like go with the flow kind of guy that Hadrian is, where he just gets swept up in things almost and just gets lost in them almost.
Yeah, okay. That's
yeah.
a good point. He's journaling, he's drawing, he's
Yeah.
like expressing himself in a creative pursuit of some way. Oh, and
Yeah.
I could see how you could get lost.
It's meaningfully different than the way that I would behave, but I think Hadrian's
Yeah.
actually quite different than me. So
Yeah.
I think it works for Hadrian.
That's fair. Okay, that
Yeah.
makes more sense. So Gibson joins him and expresses this concern that you just outlined, that's saying, hey, this isn't like literally tells him, this is not like you to miss lessons. What's going on? How are you feeling?
Yeah.
And Hadrian's clearly still pissed about his father making him join the chantry because he has no choice. But then Gibson, like, interestingly, tries to argue on behalf of Alistair's belief here and Alistair's choice.
Yeah.
He says essentially that, this is a pretty good option for you, Hadrian. I mean, you're speaking different languages is very helpful, right? And it kind of gives you what you want. You want to travel across the galaxy. You want to see interesting places and meet interesting people. This is probably the easiest path for you to get there. Now, we don't get an indication that Gibson necessarily wants this for Hadrian as well, but he's sort of pragmatically, this is one of the rare moments that we see in my perspective that Gibson is actually behaving as a scholiast, right? He's looking at this situation logically and not with emotion. And Hadrian's pissed at the idea that Gibson's even like entertaining this idea.
I like the idea that Gibson does this where he's like, listen, like, I know you hate this, but you actually be good at it. It sort of kind of cuts through everything because so much of this story at this point is Hadrian doing the teenage I'm not going to do what you want dad kind of thing, and Gibson from not against from an antagonistic point of view or anything, like it's like listen, like you would be good at this.
This is an option. This is an option for you.
It's an option. Like, I know you don't want this, but like it's something that would be good. Like you would be good at it. You'd be great even.
He said, well, not only that, I think he indicates that he could be in the synod. Gibson's like saying, you could be there. Like that, you have the aptitude to take this path that's been laid before you and achieve the greatness that I know that you desire. Because Gibson can read him like a book. After Hadrian, spills his guts about wanting to be a scholiast to Gibson again, he's like, I told you, right? And Gibson takes this extremely long pause, and I'm really interested to hear your opinion on why that is. I think that it's saying something while not saying very much. He says, the old man was silent for a long while, for so long, in fact, that I almost repeated my question. At last, he quavered, you told me. And looking back over my shoulder, I found the scholiast, his green robes blown by the sea wind, sitting with his chin propped on the brass handle of his cane, misty eyes glassed over in thought. So I read this on this read through, like, yeah, you told me that, but not having the heart to tell Hadrian that, like, he's not going to be a good scholiast. Like, that's what I read out of this. Did you read something? How did you take this?
I didn't catch this pause as much as you're catching it, but as you're rereading it, the first thing that popped into my head is that Gibson almost feels like there's a weight to taking that path that Hadrian doesn't fully appreciate, either because of the consequences of it or because of like what like the life of a scholiast actually looks like or something like that. It's like he's almost like, you've told me that before, but you don't, like, it's the sense like that you would get when you hear like almost like a father hearing something that their child has said to them before, but they're kind of just like holding out hope that they'll change their mind for some reason. That's the feeling that's evoked by that pause. I hadn't even thought about that before you brought it up, but there's something going on internally with Gibson there. Definitely.
Well, even later in that paragraph, or just by it, he mentions that he's spoken to Alistair specifically on the idea of Hadrian having the aptitude to become a scholiast, and Alistair has rejected it out of hand. And then Hadrian's like, wait, but you think I could do it? And Gibson doesn't like give him an affirmative, right? He shrugs, right? He's like, given the time they could teach you to think properly, but Hadrian, you shouldn't challenge your father in this thing.
Yeah.
So Gibson is clearly saying, right, Gibson's intimating, at least in this case, that he thinks that the chantry is a better option for Hadrian than being in an Athenaeum and becoming a scholiast, which is a really interesting thing. It's a super interesting thing.
I also think it's just like, There's a couple things going on that may be relevant in later chapters about this, but like initially what I'm feeling from him is he's inserting like Hadrian, like, I love you, bro. This is real serious what you're talking about here. Like that he later says this way lies madness. Like this pathway you're picking is way more serious than you are treating it as.
Yeah.
And like, why do that when you could be great on this path? You're choosing something very difficult here. You really shouldn't, in all honesty, betray your dad. You shouldn't go against him here. It's interesting clarity from him. He's sort of telling Hadrian, counseling him really like as a person who actually cares about you would, like, listen, bro, like this is, I know you don't want to hear this, but this is probably not wise, even though it's not what you want.
Yeah. Which is kind of wild.
Yeah.
Tells us something about Gibson.
Yeah.
Hadrian scoffs at the idea that, he shouldn't, that he needs to do this. Like he just cannot picture himself being as part of the chantry. And he talks about, Gibson then brings up this like obscure quote, which says, if survival calls for the bearing of arms, bear them you must. This quote because Hadrian thinks it's Shakespeare, right? This quote is a super obscure quote on Rocchio's part from a commencement speech given by Rod Serling, the host of The Twilight Zone, about the Vietnam War to Binghamton Central High School, which is like a high school commencement speech that's being referenced here that has made it thousands of years into. So the Twilight Zone apparently is like has lasted 15,000 years in the future. But basically, I recommend listeners go read it, because Serling was fought in World War II, he essentially, the speech is a lot about the idea of, survival is the most important, but at the end of the day, you need to do what you need to do. This is a call from Gibson saying, at the end of the day, whatever you need to do to survive is what's important. But Serling like decries some of the Vietnam War, but at the same time recognizes that, hey, in 2 weeks from now, you high school boys, you're probably going to get drafted, and that sucks. I've been there too. I was there in World War II. It's a very, very interesting speech. I suggest everybody go read it. But a really, really obscure reference by Rocchio here.
Yeah.
And I don't fully understand why he's bringing it up, but I think it has to do with the theme of like your destiny and things like that.
Yeah. This is why I say that we're not going to catch everything Rocchio is going to include references to, because he's including things from high school commencement speeches and secret inside jokes from friends. And it's just a lot. So very dense. A good catch.
Love that.
Yeah.
Gibson then tells Hadrian, you better bet that if you saw that data, if your dad showed you that data, he's already sent it on to the college, and it's a done deal.
It's done.
Like, there's no way of you getting out.
Yeah. And then we have coming up amazing Gibsonism, fear is death to reason. This feels like our fear is the mind killer sort of analog. Just we start being afraid. We start making poor judgments, not considering things clearly because we're afraid of a negative outcome. Sort of tying all of this into a neat bow is like, listen, your fear of going to the chantry and not getting what you want is clouding your ability to think about this clearly. I need you to consider that the path you're considering is extremely dangerous. It's mad. The path you are rejecting is a safe, probably good path. You need to take that dichotomy seriously and clearly before you make a decision. So think about it before we rush into deciding the mad path just because we're not thinking it through.
Yep. It's a great distillation. And he uses specifically quotes from Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, talking about the stone. He specifically calls out to Hadrian, if you want to be a scholiast, master that, because he's seeing the fear in Hadrian, right? Hadrian scoffs, thinking like he's not afraid of joining the chantry. He's like, of course you are. Like, of course you're afraid of this. If you want to be a scholiast, you have to master your fear. Otherwise, you're no better than the rest of them. And then in Hadrian's head, we get like another mini Gibsonism, something that he read from the Book of the Mind, which is this philosophical Stoic book that scholiasts have to understand, written by some obscure figure back in thousands of years ago. The frightened man eats himself. And so it harkens back to what you're saying is, right, like the idea that you're incapable. Survival instincts jump out whenever you're in that fight or flight scenario. You can't logically approach anything.
Yeah. Stoicism is really interesting. I'm glad that it's brought up here in reference and connection with the scholiasts. Stoicism, it may have come up before in the story, just like this idea of measuring the emotions, not allowing the emotions to take control. There's this philosophy difference between a lot of these different things. These people are very focused and centered on almost a detachment in a lot of ways. How can I
Similar to
alter my
Buddhism in that
it's
respect.
almost Buddhism. There's some crossover between Stoicism and modern cognitive behavioral therapy about like your upsetness about a particular thing is by virtue of the way you're thinking about a particular thing. And so they're doing a lot of things about like you want to not allow things to affect you through your thinking and your perception of them. The Marcus Aurelius quote, imitate the action of the stone, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to with the same weapons of reason which today you arm against the present. I love this idea that the Stoics sort of have, and Marcus Aurelius is saying here, of just the present is more reasonable than the anxiety about the future. We do this catastrophizing sort of behavior when we start looking out into the future. What happens if I become X, Y, or Z instead of how do I arm myself, think about this moment and make good judgments in this moment rather than doing the worrying and the things that get us afraid and making bad judgments because we're thinking too much about the future. Really interesting that it's included here.
Marcus Aurelius, just a reminder for the listeners, is a Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, considered one of the 5 good emperors of Rome, was directly put on the throne in Rome because of the actions of the Emperor Hadrian. So it's just another callback to that. Gibson, after this, Hadrian's like talking him through this, saying, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying, says, no, you don't. You know these things, but you have not learned them. This is the first time Gibson is trying to tell Hadrian directly, hey, I don't think the Scholiast path is for you. You know these things in your head, and I feel this very deeply too, because there's a lot of philosophical things that I think are really cool and interesting, but when the rubber meets the road, I don't think that way, right? Like he's telling Hadrian, you understand these things cognitively, but you have yet to put them into practice. You do not understand them as much as you think you do because you don't live them, right?
Yeah. When I was reading this, it's really actually like wisdom, the words of these things, but you haven't learned them. One of the things that's super interesting is my understanding is the research literature is essentially that knowledge of coping skills doesn't generate good outcomes. Application of coping skills generates good outcomes. It's like just the knowing isn't where any of the meat is on the bone. You have to be practicing the thing for it to have an effect on you. Just being intellectual and having the knowledge does not mean you have the skill to apply any of it.
Yeah.
Hadrian knows a lot of this stuff intellectually, but he doesn't embody the things in the way that he's supposed to be doing in the way that a scholiast would. So it's a good call out by Gibson. Really good stuff. Gibson's always great. He's on the page. It's fantastic.
Hadrian then looks at takes a pause and starts looking at these gulls that are biting the fish and thinks about the fact that these gulls are the same species or close enough after these thousands of years that were brought on these Noah's Ark-like ships off of Earth. He calls them true tyrannic gulls, the same gulls that Sargon would have seen in his days. And Sargon is the first king of the Akkadian Empire who united the Sumerian people, essentially. He's considered in history to be the first ever human emperor, right, on Earth. Really cool callback. Gibson sort of asks him, why are you looking at that? And Gibson's continuing to that, pressing him on the idea of why do you think the chantry is such a bad idea? And is trying to logically explain to him, hey, your language skills would be used here. You would get all the things that you've expressed that you want out of life. But Hadrian, in his idealist worldview, cannot stand the idea. He doesn't believe it. He cannot stand the idea of being part of this propaganda arm of the empire, right? Because this is a pillar on which the whole empire stands. They are the enforcement of not only the technological side of things and the limits for the Palatine houses and everybody in the empire around technology, but they're also this cult of Earth, believing that essentially Earth will return and rid the sins of humanity, right? This sort of Christ-like figure. Old Earth, Mother Earth is meant to be this dead god that will return. It's very,
Yeah.
very
Very
analogous
interesting.
to
Actually, it's the
Christianity.
first time we've had this like full blown old Earth coming back thing explained. I don't recall. It just jumped out on me that it was like, oh, is this the first time? Wondering if it is. It's super interesting choice from Rocchio to make Earth almost like a religious um, entity in this universe. It's really, really
It's very
fascinating.
Roman, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, like the Romans called the planets
it's
after the
gods.
gods, right?
Yeah,
Like, so, or, we call Jupiter because Jupiter is Zeus, right? The biggest planet in the solar system is Jupiter.
yeah,
It's really, really interesting.
yeah.
They then start talking about, the nature of destiny and what it is to like live life and be a piece on the board. Hadrian asks if he, as Alistair's child, is only a tool for Alistair's legacy or the legacy of the house. And Gibson, sort of, again, a rare moment for Gibson, turns on the mentat / Scolia side of him and says, technically, every Palatine child is. Otherwise, they wouldn't, they're tools to further the legacy of the Palatine houses.
Yeah, yeah.
And he says that Hadrian, you don't have an option to play, but Hadrian doesn't have to be Alistair's bishop, right? Like, he doesn't have to be a pawn. He wouldn't be a pawn in this case. He'd be a bishop, right? He doesn't have to be Alistair's bishop. He says, no matter who tries to move you, and I'd skip a little bit here, you have a choice because your soul is in your hands. And at this, Hadrian is like shocked because Ascolius, who's ostensibly, he's mentioned before, are primarily materialists, right? The idea of Ascolius talking about a soul is like shocking to Hadrian. This sort of distinguishes Gibson from the rest of normal Ascolius as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hadrian on the page begins wondering, like, what form of obedience is this coming from on Gibson's side?
I love this next session where Hadrian is looking at the fish, and then Gibson, it's just amazing. Rocky has this really great sense for metaphor and analogy and stuff. And it's like, what are you looking at? The fish. You can't see the fish, not until the bird gets them. It's just like perfect. It's a really interesting metaphor. I actually don't know precisely all of the complexities of the analogy. It's almost just like this great ocean of fish, and you don't really see one of them until it's plucked from obscurity, and yet the plucked from obscurity is the dangerous, terrible thing. It's like, so it's like
death.
Death, destiny, danger, whatever it is, sort of out of the ocean in the like sort of mass obscurity until you're noticed and seen, and yet it's in the jaws of a great beast. So it's a really interesting metaphor that he draws here. I think it's fantastic. Super, also very Hadrian, melodramatic, and I'm the fish in the mouth of the gull. Yeah, the whole bit. It's great.
And then, Gibson keeps pressing him on this, starts to use Socratic questioning to try and really dig out why Hadrian has this visceral reaction to the idea of joining the Chantry. Hadrian says, damn Socrates, the outer dark. It's like, he just hates Socrates. And I think that's Rocchio's also like pointing to his personal ideas of like, he's more Aristotelian than a Platonist or, things like that.
Yeah.
Hadrian, basically outlines all of his issues with the Chantry and then calls back to something we discussed last episode, which is this idea of the legacy of House Marlowe on Delos is bred in circuses, right? And it extends beyond that. But even if Alistair gets a new post on a new planet, he's squeezed Delos or gotten advancement in some way or some fashion, this is the plan for the house going forward. Constant advancement, squeeze, suppress the population, keep everything in line, and back to our forms of obedience, rule everything by obedience out of fear of pain.
Yeah.
And Gibson like immediately sort of, says, hey, I know you think these things and it's safe that you told me right here, but you definitely shouldn't tell anybody else because this is dangerous what you're saying. Hadrian then like scoffs at him and says, you think I would talk to Dad about this? Do you think I have no cautions? And Gibson's like, yeah, I do think you don't have very much caution as, an angel on this world, and you think that you're untouchable and you're a 19-year-old kid. And then upon a second read through on this part where Hadrian like bites back at that saying, haven't I been so cautious already around Crispin and Father for years? All this different stuff. Everything we know about Hadrian up to this point is that he is not cautious at all.
Bull in the china shop.
Totally, 100%. So he has this perception, young Hadrian has this perception of himself that he is way better at the affairs of state than he actually is. He's a great swordsman, but he has no caution in his political dealings, which is arguably more important for a palatine to have than the skill with the sword, right? They say equally earlier in the book, but the two sides of the coin, right? You need to have both of these skills to be a successful palatine. And Hadrian is clearly outlining the fact that he has 0 caution. But then he gets the wry smile, right? And this is where everything
The
starts
evil,
to turn.
the Marlowe smile.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he gets Gibson to, he asks Gibson essentially, you could write me a letter to an Athenaeum and get me accepted.
I don't know how you felt in this moment, but on a second read, I was like, ouch. Like the whole conversation about risk and danger. And at the end of this conversation, the sly thing that Hadrian has asked is for Gibson to get involved in the risk.
Yeah.
It's such a big ask that I feel like I don't know if he fully appreciates how big of an ask it is.
Yeah.
It seems almost as if, Gibson agrees to this at the end of this chapter, and narrator Hadrian almost steps in to sort of reinsert the intensity of this decision.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this great paragraph at the end that starts, living as I did in a world of servants and masters in politics, I was a stranger to real friends. My relationship to my parents could not at all be described as a loving one. So too my relationship with Crispin was characterized by my distaste for him. My bonds with the others of my father's court, with Sir Felix and Sir Raban, with Tor Alma and Tor Alsuin, Esubia, the prior, and all the rest, were only the attachments of student and teacher or master of servant. Even my nascent feelings for Kyra, although I did not know or appreciate all of what that meant, were passed through the sanitizing membrane imposed upon my life by my station. Only Gibson had broken through. He was, as I said, the closest thing to a father I ever had, and that damned us both.
Beautiful.
It's just this reinserting of I felt like almost in this moment is like, yeah, this is a very loving thing that Gibson did, but he's just like reinserting this it's like, no, this was a really, really risky thing that I flippantly asked for like my father figure to do for me. And it was something that damned us both.
Going back to what he was saying earlier, right? In the idea of he's kind of backed into a corner here, Gibson is, right? He's saying, yes, you have a choice. He's trying to argue, interestingly, for the choice of joining the Chantry, because I honestly think, talking about it, I think he thinks that that's probably the easiest path to get Hadrian what he wants, and all he wants is Hadrian to be happy.
Path with the least suffering, I think, too.
Correct. Yeah.
I think there's a part of him just like, listen, Hadrian, you don't want this for yourself. Like, I know you think you want this, but you don't know what this is going to entail. And I there's a part of me, and this sort of is suggested at the start of the next chapter as we start, which is that my sense is that Gibson doesn't really believe that he's going to talk Hadrian out of this. He's like going in, feeling like some sense of responsibility. But I think there's probably a quiet part of him that's just like, he knows where Hadrian is this is going to happen, but he feels some sort of sense of responsibility for like, at least it's like you're watching your good friend about to make a terrible decision, and you're not going to talk him out of it, but you go and you have a conversation where you're like, listen, bro, I would be a bad friend if I didn't tell you. I don't think that this, and this can happen. And they're like, I know. And you're like, listen, that's all you, but I had to tell you at least before you made that decision. It feels like that. There's also a suggestion at the start of this next chapter, chapter 11, at what cost, which is that, there's this implication that like almost Gibson was like goading him into this. And
I think this is what I want to talk. I think that's narrator Hadrian obfuscating some blame here, like feeling guilty after the fact, because it reads to me at the end of the last chapter, after Gibson says, you have your soul in your hands, right? That, you ultimately have a choice. I sort of read it as, after saying that, when Hadrian asked this really difficult thing of him, Gibson has sort of resigned himself to saying, I told the kid that he has his soul in his hands and he's choosing the harder path, right? I can't say no. So I don't know. It doesn't read as goading to me as much as narrator Hadrian says it is.
It's interesting because one could argue he's trying to confront Hadrian and talk him out of doing something different, trying to talk him out of it. One could argue that Gibson knows Hadrian well enough that pushing him hard to say to not do it will push him back harder in the other direction. It's kind of hard. It's a little bit unsure. Ultimately, I will say, though, if Gibson would insist on a pathway. He would say, no, I can't write you the letter. But he respects the choice of Hadrian enough to risk extreme harm to himself to give him the choice, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And there's
It's his
this,
life to live ultimately. And he knows
and
that he doesn't have
Gibbs.
it. Earlier in the chapter, we didn't talk about it, but Gibson's the oldest Palatine or person of high birth or patrician. We don't really understand yet that Hadrian ever knew, right? He's, you know how old you have to be for a Palatine or somebody to lose their sight. I've known men that are 500 years old that have eyes that are sharp as they were when they were 20 or whatever. So this guy's old. It's a passing of the baton to some extent of like, well, now I'm leaving. I'm on my way out of this world. I have to let the young people take it up from here. And if this is what he wants to do, then this is what he wants to do.
Yep. Yep.
So after Hadrian mulls over the idea of whether or not Gibson is goading him into taking this path, he then sets himself to understanding what it will take for him to get off planet. The two problems that he identifies in this situation are getting off world, which is the more difficult problem in his perspective, and paying for it, right? And so he's going to take the easiest part first. So he's mulling over his options, right? Do I bribe? Do I steal? Do I secretly charter a ship? This is him coming up with different ideas. And then he sort of explains the way that wealth is sort of maintained by the Palatine class and created and things like that. As we understand it today, you know, precious gems have value and all this different stuff. Diamonds are expensive. None of that matters today. Gold still has utility because it has a myriad of actual uses, which is a real thing, right? Like gold could be used as a conductor in a bunch of different stuff. It conducts heat very, very well. It's very reflective, right? There's a reason that we as humans have identified gold as like a valuable thing other than the fact that it's shiny and beautiful. And that still remains. But he really outlines the idea, and this happens with us today too, that the real wealth is in chemical wealth, right? It's a similar idea to natural resources holding the real wealth in our world, or in Dune, how the idea of, you know, Chome and these like different directorships of different commodities happen, right? So it's spice in Dune. The chemical wealth that House Marlowe has, as we've already understood it, is uranium. And uranium is super special because the Empire specifically gives licenses for you to mine it. And those are the only people that can do it. So there's a reason that this huge intergalactic company came to House Marlowe. It's because they're one of the few people that can actually produce uranium, right? Given the right to produce uranium in the Empire. And that wealth is backed by credits, which is data, right? It's numbers in your bank account. It's not
marks,
tied
right?
to a physical, imperial marks, not necessarily tied to a physical asset. He said that's where the Palatines hold all their money. And he understands that like that is probably the way that he needs to go in order to get the money he needs to get off planet.
Yeah, and it's something interesting is that there's a practical element to it of just the fact that it's a digital currency means that he doesn't have to physically haul a bunch of minerals or whatever the heck as currency. Like you can put it in your pocket and you've got as much currency as you need to get off planet. So it actually makes a lot of sense for him to go that route and then something else. So it's great. Yeah.
He then like ponders the way that he's going to do it and then comes up with his best idea yet, at least in his estimation, is he's going to use charity as a way to obfuscate his money laundering, essentially.
Yep.
Knowing that his father can't deny that because it makes him look bad as a leader. Not because Alistair wants to give charity to people. It's just that if his son gives charity away, he's less likely to look at it and less likely to do anything about it, because how's it going to look if your Archon starts, taking money back from a gift that his son is given. So he goes and meets with the guild factionaries, Lena Bellum, that he had met with in
Mining
chapter
Guild,
3, right, of the mining guild.
Yep.
He offers her a bunch of money, 120,000 marks, and she's like shocked. And then, what's the catch here, right? Like this is very generous of you. What's the catch? There has to be something. And then he, sort of smirks and says, well, you understand that like 120,000 marks is a sufficient amount, right? What if I gave you 130? And then she gets really suspicious of like, what's going on here? Hadrian sort of basically says, well, we could help each other out. I'm going to write you a contract for 150 and you are going to give me 20 back because you feel guilty for taking so much money. And you're going to give it to me either on a pallet or in
in a universal card.
So
Yeah.
it's either you'll give me physical cash, the pallet, the in her Assams or whatever, like you'd mentioned, or you're going to give it back. And she's like, do you have like a lift to take all that gold? That's a crazy amount of gold. How are you going to move that? You want to launder money and then you want to have to worry about the logistics of moving a giant pallet of gold?
Yeah.
And then he's like, all right, the card then, it's fine. And then she's like, okay, but if I get questioned about this or whatever, it's like, well, that's this other contract that I have. Mine says unfiled, says 130. And then I'll just say, um, hey, this is the contract that I did. They must have hacked the file or something like, because that's all digital, right? So he's then betting against making this agreement requires her to sign 2 contracts, one of which is her doom because they'll never believe her over the Palatine. So he's essentially blackmailing her into laundering this money for him. She gets pissed about it and says, hey, this was never really about charity. And Hadrian, like internally, at least narrated Hadrian, said, it kind of was, but it's also about survival, right? Like,
Yeah.
he does want to help these. He's expressed to us before he thinks that it's wrong that these people are dying of cancer in these mines, and he wants to help, but he also needs cash to get off planet.
What's interesting about this in this scene particularly is that number one, we see like for one, it's kind of politically savvy for the first time from Hadrian,
Yeah.
but it's also kind of cruel for the first time in another way. So it's like almost like it's a little hypocritical of Hadrian. But then there's also this other piece of this which I thought was interesting. It was very subtle about the smoking that occurs in this scene, which is that she pulls out her whatever, decides to smoke. There's a little bit of interesting stuff about how it's not going to cause lung problems or whatever. And then he allows her to smoke, and then it bothers him. And he remarks internally that he was too soft about this, which is interesting. It almost feels like this scene is a little bit of kind of Hadrian growing and learning slightly. Like he's still doing something kind of cool, but he's still doing something for himself. So he's doing a little bit politically savvy stuff. He's thinking internally about maybe being a little bit less of a pushover about things. It feels like this scene is both practically for the story, like he needs to launder money to get off planet, but also it's kind of like a microcosm of just like a small amount of growth for Hadrian, just as a character. It's kind of interesting. He's not just like a...
He's handling this interaction better than he did the first one.
Yes.
But this woman is really got him, right? She has a way, although she in the first situation, she recognizes she didn't have the power, but also could push boundaries. She's trying to push a boundary a little bit, and Hadrian's like kind of pushing back a little, but he's also recognizing that he could have done more. He could have pushed back more. And on top of that, he gets the outcome that he wants when he's acting more like a Marlowe, right? This is a move that like his mom or his dad would make, not necessarily Hadrian. So he's growing, but it's also growing against or away from his ideals, which then as he leaves, she signs the contract, of course, because it's going to save lives and it's the best deal that she can have. And there really is no way of getting out of it. And he begins flying off to the penthouse with his down bad girl, Kyra. And she compliments him on his charity, right? Like she says, like, hey, this is a really decent thing that you did, giving the miners this money. And then immediately Hadrian is ashamed, right? So can you talk about shame and like the cycle here? So why is he brushing up against, when he's reveling in the moment of the idea that like, I'm doing well and I got what I wanted out of this situation, why does he feel shame in this moment?
I think people feel guilt or shame when they have done something which they realize there's dissonance between what they've done and what their values are. And so I think he's butting it up against himself, essentially. There's cognitive dissonance here, which is like, I did something for myself. I got away with it. I did something that was competent. And I also did something which was like sort of cynical and for myself under the guise of something nice, which is generally speaking not something Hadrian likes. So
it's
he's
more
sort of
aligned with his father than it is with his values, right?
So he's at war with himself internally. That's where this shame and or guilt is generated. There's a little bit of difference between guilt and shame. There's this sense in which like shame is less healthy than guilt. Guilt is like this, I have done something bad, and shame is like this sense that like I am bad. Like there's something like worse about what just happened. It isn't just that I did something incongruent. It's like there's something kind of bad about me for having done that or something like that. So
he feels that to
your
identity.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
He is still trying to talk to this girl, has no idea how to talk to her.
Should I say she's pretty? Like, that's like where he's at internally. So
like still a kid, has no idea how to act around women. Yeah. And he shakes, again, calling back to his hand, right? He sort of steadies himself by clenching his hand and then focusing on the pain.
Yeah.
And he mentions that the idea of these religious sects in the past that had scourged themselves to feel repentance. And he disputes that by saying, this isn't really reality. It's only that pain often feels like justice. So
Yeah.
I noticed this on the first read through. That's narrator Hadrian saying this, not young Hadrian saying this. So clearly, outside of this situation, he has experienced more pain
Yeah.
than this ordeal in Delos. So there's
Yeah.
going to be pain in the future where he goes through these thoughts of like, I deserve this
Yeah.
or whatever. It's just going to be interesting to see how that manifests itself in Hadrian's
And
story.
interestingly, the full quote isn't just that pain feels like justice. It's also that pain doesn't redeem sins is a part of this quote as well.
yes.
It's like, it feels like it's just, but it doesn't do anything for
Yeah.
our
Doesn't change
salvation.
anything.
Yeah. It's there's no salvation in pain, even though it feels
In
like
self-harm, right? Specifically.
Yeah.
Or like the willful receiving of pain in the hopes to feel better, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
change what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
So he asks her to reroute the flight path. Instead of going back to Devil's Rest, he wants to go to the penthouse. And the guard's sort of like, sir, you sure you want to do that? Last time you did that, bad things happen. And then again, he starts emulating his father. And the moment that he emulates his father, he gets what he wants, right? He glares at them with his most Marlowe glare and looking like his father to tell them, go screw yourself. Hey, let's consider that the past. I'm your lord. You will do what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
May I remind you, I'm your Archon's son, he says.
Yeah. Literally calling to his father.
Out of left field. When I was reading this, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's this whole section is like, he's like testing it out. He's like, I wonder what like edgy, like intense Hadrian is like. And he's just like throwing it around right now.
Well, and if you think about it too, right, he's getting everything that he wants when he does this. So there's got to be some part of him, at least when he's younger, realizing, I don't know. Maybe there's something about this.
There's something interesting about it, I think, that's occurring to me now, which is that Hadrian has had the luxury of having to have his ideals before this moment.
Yes.
And he's having to behave in a more realistic and harsher way because he is facing genuine consequences right now. And it's almost a rebuke to young, naive Hadrian that the second he has to do something real is that he has to insert some cruelty into his manner to get things done. He hasn't gone full Alistair, but he also is not pure self-righteous Hadrian either. He can't be that in this moment because he can't afford a situation where he doesn't put enough pressure on this person from the mining guild and then this entire thing falls apart because that's everything. He has to lay the pressure on. He has to use his position because otherwise it won't work. It's an interesting rebuke to him earlier in the story for when things start to actually matter.
Rubber meets the road.
That's right.
So then they fly to the penthouse and he begins thinking about, now this is the harder step. How do I get off of the planet? That's the more difficult part. He argues that essentially as a Palatine that he is more restricted in his movements than a plebeian would be, or anybody else lower on the totem pole. And he internally sort of celebrates his success with the first step of getting the cash as the shame sort of like wears off, right? Washes away. So he's thinking about these things as he gets to the penthouse. He then ponders this quote, which is an interesting one called, "May you live in interesting times." He calls it like an ancient curse.
Yeah.
That sort of quote has a lot of interesting history behind it. Initially, it was popularized by the Chamberlain family, particularly Sir Austen Chamberlain in the 19th century, saying that it was an ancient Chinese curse. But there are no the Chinese histories are very, very well written, and there's no record in Chinese history of anybody saying this or anything close to this as a sort of curse. And so it was something that like this family in England had popularized in the 19th century. But it's interesting that this curse has still, or the idea that this is a curse has still throughout history remained. It doesn't say specifically ancient Mandari or ancient Chinese curse or whatever, but history still sort of has washed it through time.
I love this section. I'm actually going to read it, which is right after this "May you live in interesting times" quote, which is that, "With the sun setting and the black of space becoming visible above, I felt somehow that the Cielcin grew closer. I felt almost as if I could see their vessels descending like castles in the night air, though I had never seen one in truth. In my mind their towers stretched like fingers of frigid hands, delicate structures rimmed with ice that shone like the palace of grim fairies. Was it a vision or a waking dream, or else the future pressing on my present? Perhaps it was only the dull fist clenched around my soul, the aching terror that I was about to leave home. This is once again, this theme that I decided to focus on in the earlier chapter, like Distant Thunder, this continual drip of reminding us that we're having an interesting situation here with Hadrian. We're having this political thing happen, and Rockio is just reminding us every now and then, it's like there are bigger things going on, and there is a bigger thing happening than just what's going on right now with Hadrian. And it sort of pulls him out of the stories. And there's again this like weird, like, what is Hadrian experiencing? Like, is this just his imagination running wild? Is this actually what Cielcian, like, is he seeing something for real? Is this a vision? Is this a dream? Sort of similar to the way that we had this vision or dream at the end of our last section of the podcast about him seeing Gibson. Like, am I seeing something that's actually going on, or is this just something that's happening to me?
It's happening to him a lot. It's happened
Yes.
to him a lot over the last few chapters. And
Yeah.
it's hard for us to know, since narrator Hadrian, after the story is over, is writing this, whether or not that is Hadrian, reliving old, like newer memories than the old ones, and he's sort of interlacing those on top of one another, or if there's like some weird time perception thing going on.
Yeah.
It's coming up a lot. So we need to keep an eye on that as the story moves forward to understand why is he experiencing these things. Does he just have an overactive imagination, or is there something deeper going on here, or is this just purely the fact that Hadrian says he's lived longer than anyone else and his memory is, kind
All
of
mixed
mixed or
up.
muddled?
Yeah.
Because we know that he'll see the Cielcian at some point, and ostensibly he's seen their ships, right? Because he ended the war with them, right? He's
Yeah.
had to have seen their ships, but we don't know if he's seeing, his perception of time has been altered as of the events of the entire series, right?
Yeah.
In some way. And then he just like writes it off as like, maybe this is all just the fear of me leaving home for the first time. And like, this is the first time that he's actually reckoning with the idea of, I am actually going to leave my home for the first time, the place that I grew up, the only thing that I know. And that's scary.
And there's a sense in which, like, I think it's actually mentioned as like, oh, this idea of leaving home before was like abstract and not really serious to me because I was dismissing the idea of leaving offhand. But now I'm
never going to join the Chantry.
Yeah, it's like, but I've now laundered money. I've got the card in my pocket. Like I've started to take actions. Like, this is actually happening. This is not hypothetical anymore. It's become much more real now that he's acting on the plans to leave. The reality is hitting him in the face here as he starts having these visions and dreams or whatever they are. Yeah.
And he's doing this on the balcony of the penthouse. And as he's, in his own little world, this lieutenant that he is obsessed with comes out to the balcony to ask us. She could tell something's wrong, and she asks if something's wrong. And then he looks at her and then realizes that he could stare at her forever, which is like the most young puppy love crap that, yeah. I mean, I could stare at my wife forever, but nothing would get done. And I'd get, I love my wife. I could not stare at her forever. This is a very, very youthful
Who's going to feed the hogs?
Yeah. Who's going to feed them hogs? That's so great.
Man.
She then, she's walking up to him and she recognizes, because she's a human, like recognizing something's wrong with him, but she really is coming over to say, hey, the suite's locked down. Like, we got our guards posted outside. And Hadrian sort of shrugs it off. He's like, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, tell them to, do shifts or whatever, get some time off. It's not a big deal. I'm not worried about anybody attacking me here. And he's stumbling over his words the entire time. And she then turns and then is going to tell them, okay, I guess you can take shifts. And then Hadrian sort of stops her and calls her by name.
Yeah. And then she's like, why do you call me by my first name? Like, it's not proper, or there's like almost like a sense of tension about the thing.
Why is she being treated differently than everybody else?
Right. Yeah, that's right. And he starts explaining it and sort of fumbling over himself. And there's this line as he's talking about his sort of like thoughts about addressing her this way and thinking about her, he's like, there's an understanding, and is there fear in her eyes, which is like really interesting. He's confused as this like naive guy. She sort of presses him for like, why me? Why are you singling me specifically out? He gets overwhelmed and kind of caught up with things and kisses her. And she freezes, and it says she was still as stone. He starts to apologize, like, I got swept up in this thing. And immediately she like offers to join him in his bedchamber. And
her worst fears are like realized in this moment. She's wondering why she's being treated differently and hoping, like deeply hoping, that it's not what actually happens, and she understands that she has no power in the situation. It's almost like, I sort of read it as like she takes a military stance, right? Of like, if my lord wishes, I could join him in his, and then Hadrian just flips.
Yeah. And he shuts it all down. I don't even know if he says like stop or no, and then kind of storms out.
Not like this.
Yeah. And he leaves, and it's really, I actually love this this scene a lot. It's one of the most memorable scenes, actually, thinking back on this book for me. It's so different than a lot of, frankly, fiction, fantasy or other science fiction or otherwise, where there's, there isn't a like a sort of casual, like random sexual encounter that's sort of like flippant and silly, and there isn't like a childish love story going on. There's like a commentary on, despite this main character being innocent, having a crush on this person, that the power dynamics make it so inappropriate and impossible that of course this person feels trapped and uncomfortable, and it ruins the whole situation, that you sort of are left with this feeling like there's no ethical way that this possibly could have played out.
Yeah.
And Hadrian, upon sort of just being a kind of a, frankly, just like a naive teenager, like stumbles face first into the reality of that and is sort of mortified by his decision and the effect it had on her and the position that put her in. Yeah. It's a really refreshing and interesting exploration of this dynamic.
Because a lot of science fiction and fantasy, like you mentioned, it is just the hero of the story is a Don Juan, a James Bond-esque Conan the Barbarian type figure. And this guy has no way with women and clearly doesn't understand the power dynamics of the situation, to where I thought about it too as I was reading through this again. If you're a plebeian in this situation, right, and you're in service to a Palatine lord, not only are you serving them because like that's your station in life and it's sort of this divine right thing, but especially if you're working in the house, right, and directly with the lords, you are hoping to work your ass off, because not only does that mean like you can get an extended life, it means the entire line after you, like your entire family history after you, can be elevated to this like level where they can live hundreds of years longer, right? There's so much weight for these people. So not only is she unable to, in this situation, say no because of like the fact of her station, but she also can't say no because of the possibility of like, maybe I have to do this as a sacrifice so that my family can live longer, my children can live longer, and they can live better lives. That's crazy to think about.
The thing that's so like, it just like pulls emotions out of me reading it, is it's not just that she can't say no, she has to like feign enthusiastic, like it's just like
horrifying.
It's disgusting. It's not, Hadrian wasn't intending for that, I don't think.
Yeah.
And yet the dynamics of the culture and the situation surrounding them make it such that like the idea of like a woman being put in that situation and that's actually like the only choice she has is like terrifying and horrible. I really appreciate that exists in this story. I just think it's a really cool thing that there's like an actual serious ethical kind of discussion about power dynamics and consent and all this in a science fiction novel of all places, where like I feel like fiction so often is like has a really weird, like unrealistic, strange view of sex, and this is like actually a pretty thoughtful one. It's pretty refreshing, actually.
And that's where chapter 11 ends, and we begin chapter 12, the ugliness of the world. And at the beginning of the chapter, he's still sort of processing the same situation, right? With Kyra. And he thinks about This is Hadrian, the narrator, explaining to us he does not follow the normal Palatine ethics as it relates, or lack thereof, as it relates to this situation. Any other Palatine, he argues, would have taken advantage of the situation, but it was mortifying to me to do that. So he's distancing himself away from the normal social situations that exist. Like a lot of Palatines wouldn't have thought two things about it, but clearly this has impacted him. And we should keep that in mind as he, if potentially has romantic encounters in the future, how this situation has informed him and what his ethic is in relation to others of the opposite sex.
And in how he just feels about the fact that he lives in a world where like taking advantage of people and abusing people is just sort of like commonplace. It's
totally normal and expected.
Normal, expected, and interesting that narrator Hadrian, way off in the distant future, still, this is one ideal that hasn't faded over time as he's sort of getting a little bit more harsh amidst the previous stories. Like, no, this ethic, Hadrian at the end of the story still believes this is deeply ingrained after all this time. And he sort of remarks about the details of like how even though his intentions were not this, his intentions didn't matter. This dynamic still existed. And I'm still kind of mortified about it. And
there's this impassable gulf between us that never could have been crossed. And I can't believe I didn't see it at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then as he's pondering this, he also starts to, to take his mind off this, I imagine. He's trying to think of, okay, now I need to really focus my attention and effort and how I'm getting off world. He still has no idea. He thinks that, okay, well, I've got to go with disreputable people if I'm going to get off planet. It's the only way. And as he's doing this, he's sort of secluding himself in the palace. He's back at Devil's Rest. He's secluding himself in the palace. He's packing for his trip, and he's eventually going to go to the summer palace, Haspida, to be with his mom for like basically take a vacation before he ends up going back to school.
Like right before he leaves, like the last week or something like that.
3 weeks or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I thought that one of the things that was interesting about the reason he has to go with a shady kind of thing, or the way he's thinking about this, is because like it's so difficult for him to leave, because even though he's got laundered money, he is a man of station, and his genetics are a red flag like he can't get through anything official, because if he's flagged anywhere, it's like every alarm bell goes off everywhere. So he basically has to go through some unofficial channel to do anything, even though it's unsafe. That's the only possible way he could get anywhere.
Interesting world building thing on the control side of the plebeians too, that everybody has to submit to a blood test to go on a commercial freighter or anything like a commercial transport.
Yep.
And there's no way he can do that because of what you just said. So then as he's sort of pondering these ideas and consuming himself with this to get his mind off of the horror that he feels internally, he's discussing this with Gibson. And so they have created this sort of dance that they do as they, skulk around the castle. They just pretend that they're talking in different languages, and they cycle languages out so that even if somebody's listening, that hopefully they've obfuscated it enough to where his dad doesn't recognize what he's doing.
I will just say, I cannot wait, if this ever gets an adaptation, to watch Hadrian and Gibson strolling through whatever set they have, cycling through languages, Gibson with his hands behind his back. That's going to be amazing. This is so, the switching between languages thing as they're talking and just trying to be, it just feels like something you would be like watching like on a Game of Thrones episode or something like that. It's fantastic. Yeah. It's so good. When people say science fantasy related to the series, this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking like of, like there's science fiction-y things amidst this, but we've got the secrecy political element of the wandering through the palace gardens telling secrets kind of thing, and different. It's great. It's a great visual. The Jadian, classical
Lothrian.
English, Lothrian, they're just going through the whole bit. It's fantastic.
Even a bit of Cielson, but they have to be, he even specifically calls out, they have to be careful when they talk about Cielson because the chantry's ears perk up whenever Cielson is talked, right? It's super, super cool.
Yep.
Gibson basically tells him, pirates are a terrible idea, dude. Like, why are you even thinking of pirates? Like, that's an awful idea. There's got to be a better way.
Yep.
And, they divert, and Gibson asks if Hadrian's packed and ready to go. Hadrian says, yeah, almost. And Gibson specifically, Hadrian, again, not understanding the true question within his initial question, when Gibson's initial question is, did you pack everything that the instructions for the chantry told you that you could pack. And of course, Hadrian hasn't read it. He thought, why would I ever read it? I'm not going to be part of the chantry. And Gibson's like, you idiot. Like, you have to pretend, right? Like, you have to, like, you're playing this very, very too casually. You got to be more careful.
Yeah. It's funny because in an earlier chapter, when Gibson accuses him of being melodramatic, or who likes that, he's like, melodrama isn't a problem if you're an actor, and Hadrian is frankly just a horrible actor. He doesn't know how to play the role at all. He doesn't know how to do anything other than precisely what he's thinking, and so he hasn't even read the instruction that people are walking in, and he doesn't even have a bag packed to go to the chantry. It's like, so Gibson's like, bro, people are going to start asking questions if you don't have your bags packed. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, it's great.
They then talk about, Gibson consents fear in Hadrian again, as he's thinking of this great change that's coming, and Hadrian expresses to him that he wishes like that we were past this. This is the hard part in the path that he's chosen, right? Having to go through this and get off planet. And Gibson gives us a great Gibsonism. Fear is a poison. Yeah. Which I think it harkens back to the discussion we had last chapter, but it's another distillation of that. It's awesome.
Yeah. The thing that jumped into my mind is that there's like this anxiety that comes out with anticipation. Like there's like all this stuff. It's almost like the guillotine is hanging over Hadrian's head, and he's like, just like, I wish it were over. Like, we've got to just figure this out, and we've got our fear is a poison, fear is the mind killer kind of thing just tossed in. He's just reminding us, like, keep your head clear. Like, you cannot be in this place, because you're gonna have the guillotine fall if you're so focused on the future and your anxiety. You're not gonna pack your bags, and you're gonna be found out. You're gonna get caught if you don't keep your head about you. Yeah.
Then they switched to try and get Hadrian off of this, overly introspective part of himself and to focus on other things. Talks about packing again, and they discuss the fact that Tukros is a planet that is way warmer than what Hadrian's wardrobe is used to. So he talks about the fact that Tukros doesn't have a water cycle, and they use sand plankton to produce oxygen on the planet because that's the only way that they could get the planet to populate, and because the heat in the summer sort of burns any flora or fauna. I think this is a clear reference to Dune as well. The idea that the worms produce the oxygen on Dune, and that's what makes it work. Sand plankton is an interesting one. It seems more believable than giant 400-foot tall worms.
Oh, but it's not as cool, and I can't.
They don't kill you, and they're not like a god.
We can't have bookends about the little things either.
Sand plankton bookends would be interesting.
Oh no, there's this thing. It's your sort of transition where Hadrian it drops this like sort of casual line of like, hey, if we meet again, I'll be in green, and then Gibson is like, we are not gonna meet again.
If this works, we will not.
And, it sort of is this moment of realization where I think Hadrian, for the first time, I don't think he really cares about a lot of of the relationships around him, but it's like, if this works, then I don't ever see Gibson again. Like, and it's the first time I think he fully appreciates the cost of what's actually about to happen. It sort of just speaks to the fact that he hasn't thought through the consequences of what he's doing, if he hasn't even considered the fact that he's never going to see his father figure again. This is the first time he's realizing it. So, and then
Gibson then goes into he mentions that he's written Hadrian's letter, and Hadrian, of course, is chomping at the bit hearing that, right? Like, I'm so excited. Yes. It's the one thing that's bringing him out of this sort of melancholic feeling.
I believe he gives it to him in a book, which is the story of Sagara, the king with 10,000 eyes. And so it gives him this book, and there's like the letter in there.
Hadrian scoffs like, why are you giving me this novel? I didn't think Scholaeus read novels or whatever. Just so dumb, right? And then at the end of the chapter, he opens the book and he sees it. But I think before that, though, he has this diatribe again, a very un-Scholaeus diatribe. Right, Gibson's very clearly an aesthetic, like artistic, more so than the like pure materialist mathematician, scientists-esque figures that we understand, and human calculators that we understand the Scholaeus to be. He's focused on beauty and these different things. And again, Hadrian's ears perk up at the idea that they're having this discussion. It's a great message, a very non-Scholaeus lesson. And he says, I'm going to teach you a lesson that no other Scholaeus is going to tell you. And he says, the ugliness of the world will come at you from all sides. I think we should read that piece. It's so beautiful because I think it's very, very well written.
Yeah. So the section we're referring to here is Gibson raised a hand to quiet me. This is a gift from an old Aunt May. He waved his hand to raise a hand of dismal and self-deprecation. Now hear this. Here's a lesson no tour or primate of the college will ever teach you, nor any chancellor agnost, if it even can be taught. He turned again to look at the sea. The world's soft the way the ocean is. Ask any sailor what I mean. But even when it's at its most violent, Hadrian, focus on the beauty of it. The ugliness of the world will come at you from all sides. There's no avoiding it. All the schooling in the universe won't stop that. So overawed I was to hear a logician like Gibson speaking like this. I did not stop to wonder what he meant by the ugliness of the world. Now I wonder if he knew what the very day held for us both, or how quickly the boot would descend as it had on the face of that poor slave in Colosso. But in most places in the galaxy, nothing is happening. The nature of things is peaceful, and that is a mighty thing.
It's beautiful, right?
Yes.
It's a very anti-Scholiast message, but it's the idea of gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Like in those moments where things are hardest, focus on what really matters. And at the end of the day, it's like creation is beautiful. And to go back to something we didn't discuss earlier, there's some world building stuff that Rocchio hammers home here, right? The idea, I think the world building is feeding into this message that he's trying to send, because Delos doesn't have a moon. So that the seas are placid because there are no tides. And the sailors even say that the seas are soft. So literally on this world, the seas are really soft because there's no tidal waves, right? But it hammers home the idea of step out of yourself and recognize that, you are not the focus of this entire project or in this entire life. Like, there is beauty to be found in even the smallest moments, despite the fact that the world will constantly be throwing this ugliness at you. It's a beautiful, beautiful message. And I absolutely love it.
And I think it's going to emerge again. We'll probably return to this in just a moment here amidst the next chapter, because I have more words about it. But this idea that, like, finding the beauty amidst the ugly, I think is a theme, not just for this chapter, the next chapter, but I really think for the full series, is that it's a main theme of the series, one that Rocchio wants us to really take out of the series, actually, and carry along with us. It plays, I think, a large part in Rocchio's actual in real life worldview. It's going to be one of the main messages that's going to be thrust home for us, for the reader. So carry it with you throughout everything that happens, because I think it's of the utmost importance alongside some of the other themes that happen at the end of these chapters.
And again, right before the chapter ends, he has some trick of the light or some imagination, right? This perception thing that keeps happening to him happens again. But he gets this beautiful, like, this shadow, like this cloud comes over, the shadow is cast, and Hadrian is able to see Gibson with clouds behind him and the sea. And this is whenever he ponders Gibson thousands, not thousands, but, hundreds of years later, however long Hadrian's lived, we don't know the distance between this and when Hadrian's, writing this. But whenever he thinks of Gibson, he thinks of his face as of this moment, right? To recall him in any other light other than that of that beautiful day is somehow sacrilege, as though all our other days were ugly, right? And so it's hammering home this ugliness of the world. He sort of ties that to this image that he holds in Gibson of his mind. And that's the end of chapter 12.
The scourging at the pillar.
Chapter 13.
Bells start to ring immediately as this chapter starts, and sort of feel the ominous ring of the bells as you're reading the page. I can imagine almost the feeling that's evoked as you're sitting quietly doing nothing, as all of a sudden on the wrong hour, so like off the hour, it's not noon, the bells are ringing for something. So something is wrong. Hadrian grabs his Carn Cigar book, sort of shoves it somewhere real quick. I think at the bottom of a Foot Locker, he says, in this thing he's packing, and he sort of runs, and there's a crowd sort of gathering. It's almost like he runs out here and sort of realizes this for a second. He's like, wait a second, I've run out here. Is there a problem with me? Like, I just ran out into the open. All of a sudden, there's this thing. He's sort of following the crowd. Narrator Hadrian tells us that people start to follow him, but young Hadrian doesn't notice that people have started to follow him. So something is, like, really amiss and wrong.
The whole castle is, like, congregating in this like area outside, probably in like a, within the walls, but within this like around a statue outdoors. Everybody's there. There's some assembly going on. And he even looks up and sees that there are like news drones that are looking over and recording whatever's going on. And as this happens, above the crowd on this platform, his father appears after this like homunculus comes out and calls like the Lord, Alistair, Archon, names all his titles, right? And so this royal walks out with his knights behind him, but the whole retinue behind him. And Crispin's up there on the platform and Hadrian is not, right? Another indication that Crispin is the in crowd and Hadrian is not in the in crowd. And Hadrian notices the fact that Felix is not there.
Yeah.
Right.
That
his best knight is not behind him for some reason.
Yeah. He mentions that like as Alistair comes out, he's about to speak. There's like this empty silence that's just prolonged as Alistair does. And once again, trickled back into the story is he thinks that the Cielcen have come. Like that's the first thing that pops into his head. Like, oh crap, they're here. Of course, that's not what's going on, but we're trickled back into it. Immediately, Alistair uses Hadrian's name. You're all aware that
he brings disturbing news, right? It's like he mentions that Hadrian calls him by name, which we know. Boop, 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 boop. Uh-oh.
Red flag.
Something's wrong.
Yeah.
And he says that everybody knows that Hadrian is going to leave for Vesperad, but mentions the fact that there was a traitor in their midst and had a plot to kidnap Hadrian and sell him to the Extrasolarians.
Yes.
Hadrian, of course, is shocked and confused. And he's looking around trying to understand this, and he sees one thing, and then all of it starts to click. He sees a wooden whipping post on a dais, like above the crowd, but below the platform, or maybe it's on the platform or whatever. There's a whipping post that is visible to the entire crowd, and somebody's going to get punished here. And at that moment, Gibson is brought out and like finds Hadrian in the crowd because he's taller than all these plebeians, and he smiles at him briefly. A real smile, Hadrian notes, right? Like
not a Scolia smile, like a real smile,
right? Yeah. All of the Scoliast ideology completely gone in this moment. Hadrian then like jumps up and like starts to like try to get up on the platform and plead for mercy, and Gibson like surreptitiously shakes his head when
people that
Hadrian
followed him grab him.
Yeah.
The people. Yeah. So he's sort of restrained amidst this moment. There's like this like almost like internal thing going on between him and Gibson in this scene where Gibson is like trying to tell Hadrian to stop and that it's okay. And Hadrian is just like not wanting this to happen. And it just, they're having this like sort of like telepathy battle almost in this horrible
it's a
moment.
non-verbal conversation amidst this moment.
Yep.
Alistair begins interrogating for the show of the crowd, right? This is part of his pillars of bread and circuses, right? And obedience out of fear of pain, right? He has to do this way in order to keep everybody else in line. So he mentions that Gibson has worked for the family for 317 years and basically blames him for the plot to sell Hadrian to the Extrasolarians, to which Gibson admits, right? Confesses in front of the crowd. Yes, it was me. And at that moment, immediately, first thing, like no protest, just says that that's going to happen. And Hadrian realizes that Gibson is sacrificing himself to make sure that he can escape, right? To obscure any potential questions, to give him a better shot. He doesn't know if it's going to work, but to give him a better shot at leaving, he is throwing himself in harm's way in order to get there. Clearly, Gibson here, we've been wondering, right? Like, what is Gibson's form of obedience that he is observing, right? Like, Hadrian asks it later. We were wondering even before Hadrian asked, like, where is this coming from? It's clear to me in this moment upon this read through that Gibson is obedience out of devotion, right? He is devoted to Hadrian as a father, like surrogate father figure. And that's why he is doing this.
And I think if we just recall briefly the chapter that was before this, the ugliness of the world, it's sort of brought into focus right after having this discussion about beauty. And we have this horrible scene that's sort of thrust in front of us. And I thought it was worth mentioning that the scene is horrible, it's horrific, it's hard to read, and yet there's something beautiful and heroic about sacrifice amidst this scene. And I think that this is sort of the message really sort of fully encapsulated is without horror, without terror, there is no sacrifice, there is no heroism. And the contrast...
And no devotion.
No devotion without a moment like this. And so as you look at this horrible scene, the ugliness is all around, and yet there is this thing that doesn't exist without the ugliness, and this whole thing comes together to create something horrible but beautiful at the same time. Yeah, it's a very Christian message, frankly. You know, we're having someone
This is the scourging of
sacrificed,
Christ, right?
we're,
Yeah.
we're having someone like whipped for a crime they did not commit for the sacrifice of another. Very Christian ethic that's being portrayed in the previous chapter and then on the page here. Not to harp on that too much, but it's very clear that this sort of ethic is coming through the author into the page. It's pretty amazing, really.
And the devil in this case is the one perpetuating the punishment, right?
I didn't even think about that. You're
Yeah.
correct. Yes,
Yeah.
the devil.
No,
Yeah.
straight up. That it's all connected. Alistair then plays a recording for the crowd, observing the forms of this, right? And plays Gibson's confession that he made, you know, when he was tortured previously or just when he was in a holding tank or whatever for the crowd so that the news hears it, right?
Yeah.
Alistair then gives Gibson his sentence, which is that he is to be banished because of his service, right? He's served the house for 317 years, and that is being considered in this sentence. Hadrian then at that moment tries to say, this is not true. Like, he didn't do that. And then Gibson yells immediately to shout over Hadrian, right? Which is, again, very un-Gibson-like. To say that it is because Hadrian's trying to break what Gibson's doing for him.
And it's brilliant too, because in this moment, Gibson actually outmaneuvers Hadrian as well by being openly heretical in front of the crowd to provoke even more condemnation. He's like, no, I wasn't going to allow them to send him to this farce of a chant. Like, he inflames things more intentionally to undermine Hadrian's ability to.
Not only that, what does he do to Alistair? He calls him by his first name in front of everybody that serves in the house, right? Totally a faux pas.
Yeah.
And treats him like a child. Nobody would do that. We know that Gibson, theoretically was on the shores when Alistair was, moody as a teenager or whatever. He's known Alistair his whole life or the majority of his life. And he does this not because maybe he believes it, but he's doing it, like you said, politically to make sure that this path, we're going down it. You cannot save me, Hadrian. You need to take this lifeline.
Yep.
And the chantry immediately, it's like, heresy, kill him, Lord. Just immediately. Hadrian thinks to himself, this particular piece was planned, right? The idea of Eusebia calling for his full execution was planned. They had arranged the punishment beforehand, and Eusebia's not surprised by any of this, right? Hadrian then begs for mercy. Alistair is giving Gibson his form of mercy, which is giving him his life after his pound of flesh gets extracted. And then we've been wondering where Felix was this whole time, and Felix comes out in this ritual torturer / executioner's garb.
Horrible. It's horrible. It's like the image of Sir Felix sort of marching towards this, and then you have to realize, like, oh my God, like, are you serious? Like, it's just, it's
probably the closest in terms of, he says Gibson's far and above anybody else, but that seemed like probably the next closest person to him.
Felix
in his instruction is now punishing his favorite teacher.
Yeah. It's terrible.
And this is the moment that we see it actually happen on page, that Gibson's nostril gets cut, right? Hadrian swears he could see it before. This is the moment that was foreshadowing. They tie him to the post, and we're not going to talk too much about this because it's a horrific read, especially upon a second read through, right? Like, it's a harrowing experience that Gibson goes through. He gets 15 lashes, and as he progresses through them, he gets less and less human, right? The pain is breaking him down.
It's mentioned terrible. Here by, amidst this, narrator tells us that Gibson dies later in exile. He doesn't die here. Like, we know this going into the punishment. And Hadrian sort of speaks about the fact that he's glad that Gibson didn't know what his life would become, the suffering that Hadrian would experience. It's almost a sense of, like, I'm glad that Gibson didn't know in this moment that things were going to go so poorly for me.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that the author would decide to let us off the hook, so to speak, that Gibson doesn't perish here, and yet it's still so horrible.
But there's mercy in that too, right? There's mercy in the idea that, like, well, at least Gibson didn't live long enough to see who I've become in the eyes of this, entire empire. and
Yeah.
see the things that I did to become the Sun Eater. It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
When it's over, when Gibson is muling, like has lost all sense of humanity at this point, is totally beaten and broken, Alistair yells and sends everybody back to work. And this is, again, Alistair displaying to everybody else, saying, hey, you try and mess with my plans, this is what happens to you. Hadrian then gets brought up to the platform, and Alistair asks him why he did this. And then Alistair stares him in the windows of his soul and says, because Hadrian, says his name again, it couldn't be you. So he knows, he's intimating him, I knew it was your plan.
Actually, what happens is Hadrian asks him, why did you do this? And I think his father is implying, it's like, I couldn't whip you, Hadrian. I had to whip
100%.
Gibson. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
could not. I could not
Yeah.
whip you. You were a Palatine. I couldn't make, because that breaks his whole structure, right?
Yeah.
If Hadrian can be punished like that, he's not an angel anymore. He's already been broken on the streets. That's already a threat. If he did it to him again, then all the plebeians know that these people are fallible.
We can't
right?
let them see you bleed. Yeah.
Yes. Bigger picture. I just thought about this as we were looking through this. This is Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think it may be a reference to that as well. Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi in their fight in A New Hope. 3 people are holding Luke Skywalker back as he watches on, right? And wants to go and help. Obi-Wan Kenobi fights this battle with the surrogate father and father are fighting, right? Older surrogate father is fighting actual father. Father kills or maims, right? Surrogate father.
Oh my God. I can't even, I had a brain blast that we can't discuss yet because of spoilers. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. There's definitely some ties to that scene in A New Hope here.
Yeah, I'm feeling that as well, actually. I think that connects everybody. Put a pin in that. I think that
not only the robes too, right? He's in green robes before, right? But you know, Jedi in robes versus Sith in black, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a terrible, terrible chapter. But it needed,
terrible.
That's the reason that we wanted to do 4 chapters this week, is because hammering home the idea of the ugliness of the world being present and trying to see the beauty despite the ugliness that we saw.
And as we're cleaning up here, you know, we have more interactions between Alistair and Hadrian. There's discussion about, you know, Gibson may have successfully put Hadrian in a situation where Alistair doesn't think Hadrian's capable of enacting a plan of his own. So even though Hadrian is in a compromised position, he still has an advantage here in a way, because Alistair is not expecting him to be able to get off planet by himself. Alistair strikes Hadrian at one point at the end of this chapter, like straight up fist punches him.
Yeah.
Punches. I mean, just the least
Rips
composed
part of his cheek out. Yeah.
Least composed we've seen Alistair. Furious, he threatens to kill Gibson if Hadrian continues on this path. It's at this point that, you know, I realized when I was reading this, is like, I think that's part of the reason that Alistair is so furious with Hadrian, is that Hadrian is not controllable because Hadrian doesn't adhere to this obedience out of fear dynamic. He just doesn't respond to it. And therefore, Alistair doesn't actually have a means to control Hadrian. Hadrian doesn't adhere to this value system. And so he's a loose cannon. And so no matter how much punishment Hadrian takes, he continues to rebuke and disobey his father. You know, Hadrian's sent back to his room. He's sulking about all this. It's described that he doesn't even really have room for tears anymore. Like, it's just so terrible.
Total shock.
Yeah, he recalls this vision from the previous end of our podcast of Gibson with the nose slit, branded a criminal. It all comes back to him realizing the connection, and suddenly he realizes that the room is different, and very quickly realizes that the book is gone, which contained the letter from Gibson in the first place. And that's where the chapter leaves us before continuing on a little bit of a
How do you see the
cliffhanger.
good in this, right? It's
Right.
everything is looking again. Now it looks like Hadrian's going to seminary.
Yeah.
How could he possibly get off world now? But we'll see. We'll see if he finds a way to do it.
Yeah. Man, what a collection of 4 chapters. We've got a whole range of things, from plotting and scheming Hadrian growth to missteps with women to the beauty amidst the horror of life and the fall of our father figure, all in one section. What a great section of the story.
But I think that's it for us today here at the Devil's Rest Book Club. And as we will say every episode, always forward
And always down.
and we'll see you next time. Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books, an imprint of Astra Publishing House, on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2025, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us. And remember, rage is blindness.